I'm Monica Dennis, and my pronouns are she, her, and Tuguya. I'm the co-director of Move to End Violence along with Priscilla Hung. And Move to End Violence is a program of the Novo Foundation where we bring activists, storytellers, cultural workers, and community organizers together to strategize about ways to end gender-based violence. I'm also a community organizer, an activist, someone who is deeply rooted in Black feminist liberation movements. I make my home in New York City, but specifically on Canarsie, Lenape land. And my people are also stolen Africans who were brought to the United States many generations ago, more than 7 and 8 generations ago, and who are deeply rooted in the southeastern part of the United States. And that shapes all of that context of being from stolen African people, from people who have spent a lot of their history resisting and providing mutual aid to each other. Being a Black feminist shapes how I show up in my work and in my relationships and my dreams for the future.
My name is Telesh Priscilla Pascual López. I am Maya Canjobal Acateco from Guatemala. My family and I are survivors of a civil war and genocide of indigenous peoples, and grew up in Los Angeles. And for me, language is integral to our spirit and my work. I'm an interpreter. I'm also a language justice mover with MEV. And I currently live in Tongva territory in Los Angeles. And I fiercely believe in language justice, and that all peoples, regardless of where you are, carry knowledge and can share knowledge between peoples. I am deeply committed to language justice through my consulting work, through my interpreting work, because I really believe that when our peoples are able to get through that language barrier, what we can build is unimaginable.
So I didn't know about what language justice was, but until I was in conversations with Telesh, and then also, but I knew that I was already doing it, but I didn't know what the name of it was. So part of my entry point is as a young person growing up in the South Bronx in a community that is very diasporic, with folks from the Spanish-speaking Caribbean and Latin America, from French-speaking Caribbean, and also Black people who are from the United States. And in that community, this is in the early 70s when I'm growing up, I attended a school called CS211, which is La Escuela Bilingüe. And it was a community-run school where my teachers, my caregivers, the families were from communities, and language and culture were at the center. And so I grew up bilingual, but learning particularly Spanish from the history of the people that were in my community. So Puerto Rico has a really foundational shaping in my understanding of myself in the world, because so many of my teachers were from Puerto Rico, who were from Loíza, who were from Aguadilla, who had migrated to the United States and were teaching me language by teaching me the history of Puerto Rico. And there were teachers from other parts of the Spanish-speaking Caribbean and Latin America who were also providing that experience. So, and their understanding was, it wasn't like a big immersion program like we have today, like you should learn a language because it's the professional thing to do, it looks good on your resume. But it was really, these are the families that live in this community. They have to be able to talk to each other. They have to be able to learn together. And so it was incredibly strategic and very common sense. Like, you have to be able to know the language to be able to communicate and collaborate. Also, what was real interesting when I look back is they were incredibly political, right? So some of those teachers organized with the Young Lords Party. Some of those teachers were Black Panthers. And as a young person, they were our teachers and caregivers and friends. So even though I just thought that's how the world worked, right? That's how I thought the world worked. And it was incredibly profound to be able to build relationships, to build understanding, to be respected in my whole humanity, to be encouraged, to be creative because of that language justice, what I know now is language justice, right? Really being able to come together for relationship, for connection, for dreaming, for possibility, and doing something that was outside of the norm. There was like one of only 2 schools in New York City that were doing that at that time. And so that experience has followed me. And then I come to meet Telesh López. I knew of you and Caracol for many years as an anchor in community, making sure that language justice is something that is practiced and is available. And at Move to End Violence, we previously were practicing language access, meaning we would provide interpreters and some translation for our programs, but we needed to shift to something that was more grounded, that actually that supported movements, activists, organizers, storytellers from communities to be able to tell their own stories in their own ways, and without that being a barrier. So in 2018, Telesh and I began a conversation about what it could look like. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
My entry point is pretty personal. My first language was my indigenous language. And when we fled Guatemala during the Civil War, my parents were very worried that I wouldn't learn English because I didn't speak Spanish. And so that was the separation of my native language and myself. And I continued to speak Spanish, but I always was surrounded by my native language. My family, I observed my family, and just thinking back of how they would speak Spanish outside, but when we were in the house, it was just our native language everywhere. So those sounds are super familiar to me. And I feel like they were in resistance, even though they may not have been speaking outside in public. They continued to speak with each other. They continued to laugh. They continued to love with our language being very present. And when through my time in New York, I volunteered with domestic workers, and they are the ones who introduced me to the language justice framework. And I fell in love with it. I really connected with it. I understood what it meant, and I saw the impact that it could create, not only in one sector of work, but the impact that it could have beyond that. And so I was very inspired to continue doing my work, and collaborated with 2 other people to begin Caracol Language Cooperative. And from there, that's where we met. And I will always see you and MEV as LJ champions, because you asked me to dream. You asked me to dream and to not think about how is this going to happen, who's going to do the thing. It's just like, don't think about that. Just what could this look like if you had everything you want to have a dream team? And I think what we have built together is beyond what I imagined.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I know that Move to End Violence like reflected the larger society of like, but one, that English dominant is the way to go, right? We live in the United States, and there's always this like constant forcing of like English is the official language of this country, when we know there were hundreds of indigenous languages before the United States became the United States, that there are millions of people who speak multiple languages, right, who are coming from all over the world, and that's been the history of what is now the United States. And, just this forcing of English as an only language, MEV as a program was not different than the rest of society, thinking that in order to be able to be bilingual, trilingual, multilingual, it's a limit, it's a barrier, right? And I think by that I mean that it's like an add-on. Like, okay, you speak Spanish, okay, you speak French, okay, let's just add on, but without thinking through what does it mean to actually have a welcoming space. What does it mean for people to be able to, what do we even understand that there are multiple types of French and English and Spanish and Creole, right? And so I think we were a reflection of the larger society and just treating language itself, or multilingual, multicultural experiences, as if it's just like a checklist or an add-on, like a thing to do. And being in partnership with you, Ramelsi Uribe, who is my partner at Move to End Violence, and Priscilla, our whole team, Letitia, Sequoia, and the LJ Movers, you've taught me that I actually have to rethink everything. So it's been my own decolonizing process around language, right? Like, so our staff is different. Our staff is multilingual. How do we approach storytelling? How do we actually start from outside of English? You know, you've been such a great motivator and saying, Monica, you don't actually have to start in English and then translate to Spanish, translate the content to Spanish. But what does it mean to have facilitators and team members who are already thinking in their languages, and then have that move forward? That would be breaking the dominance. And it's been such a healing and wonderful experience. And I've felt the impact on my life. And so many of our cohort members have brought forward their own practices and also shifted some of the ways we work, right? So we heard the other day that Imara Jones of Translash Media has now reshaped all their work. So it is now at least in Spanish and English. And that's because of the experience that we had with you and Kata and Wendilyn and Lila and the whole LJ Dream team. And that was just in less than 2 years. So I think what's possible when we really commit ourselves.
And I'm so grateful that you all were so open to this invitation, right? I think that that's really what makes the difference of a group of fierce Black women who are like, no, we're gonna really take this on. I wanna hear everything you have to say. I'm curious, I'm open. And I think that so many spaces, and specifically social justice spaces, see it as that very fragmented work. And it's not. It's an entire framework, right, that is applied. And for me, you know, when we talk about the sources of knowledge come in all languages, and imagine if we opened it that way, right? What does it look like? And I really feel that you all received that invitation and have created something really beautiful, and to see the ripples of the work that we have been so committed to and invested in the last 3-ish years, to see some of that and witness some of that with our movement makers, we know we're on the right path. Y con este trabajo que estamos haciendo, realmente estamos cambiando esa narrativa, ¿no? Cuando trabajamos con organizaciones sociales aquí en los Estados Unidos y les decimos, ustedes cuéntenos sus experiencias, aprendamos de ustedes, queremos escucharles, ¿verdad? Es realmente importante, y creo que eso abre tantos espacios, y lo hemos visto aquí con MEV, con les Movement Makers, ¿no? De cómo podemos apoyar esos enlaces entre comunidades, entre movimientos de los Estados Unidos y de otros países. En este encuentro fue con compas de Honduras y compas de aquí de Puerto Rico. Y creo que muchas veces hay organizaciones que llegan a un lugar y quieren compartir solo lo que ellas saben, ¿no? Pero en estos espacios queremos escuchar de todas las personas, no importa qué idioma están hablando. Y lo veo que creamos en este encuentro, fue trilingüe, ¿no? Español, garífuna e inglés, ¿no? Entonces fuimos testigos de tantas conversaciones tan impactantes, no solamente a las personas que están conversando y intercambiando, pero para los intérpretes, ¿no? De ver el impacto del trabajo que hacemos y de nuestro compromiso, y ver qué es lo posible en esas colaboraciones, en esos intercambios. Por eso hacemos este trabajo, ¿no? Este trabajo para mí es de vida, ¿no? Es de la vida, y creo que cuando comunidades tienen la oportunidad de intercambiar, nos podemos ver, no nos podemos ver de lejos y desconectadas, pero nos vemos como familia, nos vemos juntos en estas luchas en las que todos estamos, y creo que mientras yo pueda hacer este trabajo, me comprometo a continuar.
This question, this big idea about why language justice is vital to transnational solidarity, the first thing that came into my spirit was I was thinking about my ancestors and like stolen Africans who did not share the same language, who many times didn't share the same culture. They were cultural threads, but not of the same actual villages and tribes being forced onto a slave ship together, right? And so to me, that's like one of the, for me in my own history, that makes me think of like, if they didn't share language, what did they need to do? They had to figure out how to communicate, how to use sound, how to figure out what were the shared words, the shared expressions, like using the fullness of their expression in order to resist, in order to survive, and then have life in what we now know as the Americas, right? And so to me, the vitalness of language justice and transnational solidarity is about resistance, being able to share our strategies and stories around resistance, to be able to heal across communities, right? There's been so much pain and trauma from all of these forces of oppression that when we can communicate across languages, we can have very healing processes with each other. And then I think from what you're saying that there's so many common struggles, but if I actually don't understand how my struggle is connected to other people around the world, then it becomes very small and my possibilities are small. And I think it's so important for folks in the United States to have an expansive like view of transnational solidarity, right? Like all of the information, the understanding of movements, the strategies cannot just be centered in the West, cannot just be centered in the United States. So language justice actually helps us to have a broader view and creates just more possibilities for liberation and survival and thriving. So for me, that's why it's important.
I'm really excited to dream together on how we can make that happen, because part of my inspiration to continue doing this work is because I don't believe it lives in one sector, one movement. I really believe that it's very intersectional work. And so for me, it's really important that we don't keep anything here, that everything that we have built, everything that we have thought about is shared with others, and make it exciting, right? Because what we have done is innovative in many ways and not in others, right? Because our communities have managed to communicate for way before this time. And so I really believe that the work that we've done here is already having such deep impact, and thinking about us being intentional in continuing to share our learnings and experiences will really shift the movement.